And I guess that's my cue. The music stops. So good afternoon, good morning, and good evening from wherever you're calling from. My name is Jeremy Jam Hartley. Please feel free to call me Jam. Everybody else does. And it's great to welcome you here today for our Saudi Airport Exhibitions webinar on Vertiports, the future of urban air mobility. Just to give you a bit of background, Saudi Airport Exhibition is now in its third edition and is the premier airport development event in Saudi Arabia. This groundbreaking event, organized by Niche Ideas and NSCX, invites aviation industry professionals and enthusiasts to gather and showcase the latest advancements in airport operations, build and installation, technology and IT, ground handling services, aviation support services, and air traffic control and airfield services. The exhibition is going to be taking place at Riyadh International Convention Center from the 11th to the 12th of November 2024. And it's going to feature a wide range of companies from around the globe, each showcasing their latest products and services. We're going to start off, as I said, my name is Jeremy Hartley. I worked for the UK SAE. My position there is a vertiport policy specialist. So I am one of the key individuals in the UK working to establish policy regulations for vertiports in order to make them safe. But today is not about me. I'm just moderating the program. It's about four other individuals, four other vertiport experts have been brought in today to discuss vertiports, urban air mobility, and the future of cities within the world. I'm going to let each of the individuals introduce themselves, and I'm going to start off with Clem Newton-Brown from Skyports.
Thanks, Jeremy. Just a bit of a reflection. Isn't it amazing that we've got this international of people for an industry that doesn't exist yet, or in the audience, and also people on the panel. So it is a great international community. We're all trying to work together to work out this great big puzzle, and we're sort of particularly focused on the landing infrastructure side of things, which we're all have in common here on this panel. So yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Just by way of background, I don't come from an aviation background. My background is in politics, planning, town planning law, tourism, and property development. So my focus is really where I think we can add value is a little different to our colleagues around the world who are also doing vertiports. So our focus is not so much on trying to build the first vertiport. The design behind me, and you may have seen other designs. We've got an amazing architect, Rafael Contreras, who used to work for Zaha Hadid and designed the Beijing airport. He's designing his vertiports. So we are able and ready to build vertiports with large team of consultants who we've sort of assembled of where the industry is going is to look at a few things which I suppose is my particular background. And that's the bureaucratic, political and community support for breaking the nexus between aviation and airports, and getting those policy settings such that we can actually do what all these OEMs are promising that their aircraft can do. And then the other area is the landing infrastructure, where actually getting the options on the sites and igniting the interest in the property industry to present their properties and put them in our stable. So we're sort of collecting all these things together, and so we're not rushing to be building a vertiport right now. It's great to see what's happening in Dubai at the moment. I think we've got a little bit of time, but that's our unique difference, I suppose.
Excellent, Clem. Thanks for your introduction. Really appreciate that. We're going to move to Ricky Sandhu now. Ricky is a veteran, I think, in the vertiport world. He's already established a test in Coventry a few years ago. Maybe he'll talk about that. Maybe he won't. But Ricky Sandhu is from Urban Airports, and I'm going to turn it over to him. He's the founder there. And Ricky, why don't you tell people a little bit more about you?
Thanks, Jeremy, and hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on the call. As Jeremy just said, my name's Ricky Sandhu. I'm the founder and executive chairman of Urban Airport Limited. We're a UK-based company. We're UK government-backed. And we have Hyundai Motor Group as one of our biggest anchor investors, which is a very important it's a very important piece of urban airport, because obviously that helps us, stem the tide in an industry that has been emerging for quite a while. And whilst it's very kind of Jeremy to call me a veteran, I'm not that old, but I have been working in this space since 2017, actually. So probably one of the people in the world who's been developing vertiports and focus on AAM for many years now. And actually, we've designed and built several vertiports for a number of competitors who we see as collaborators, actually, and clients and governments around the world. So it's really exciting to be here. I think our USP is that we have over a dozen patents filed in the UK, and these patents extend globally. And our approach is based on our expertise, really, and our background as a team, designing buildings, towers, airports, and lots of transport infrastructure over the course of 20 years. I cut my teeth at a company called Foster & Partners, one of the world's leading architectural and design practices. And there I was leading the Qatar Airways airport expansion project for the fastest growing airline at the time. And the mandate there was double my airport, but don't get in the way of my 2 operational runways. And so, that gave us a lot of experience in the importance of, the cost and CapEx and the OpEx of building, designing, operating airports. And we kind of bring that to urban airport. And so our kind of patents and solution is all based around a very disruptive approach. So as opposed to having a land expansive, large area at grade, as a typical heliport or typical vertiports, our solution is based on having a vertical airfield where we take that expansive real estate and we kind of 3-dimensionalize it, which means we can be 90% smaller for any given comparable vertiport, which also means we're safer, we're quieter, we fit in, it costs less. And ultimately, the most important thing is that people don't really talk about is operating airport infrastructure or any infrastructure is the OpEx that really adds up. And so if we can provide that efficient operation, which we think we can, with a small footprint, that all adds up to the business viability of this industry. So that's what we've been focused on. And you would have seen recently some announcements around our research and R&D, which spans a lot of different topics, but most recently on the eVTOL downwash and outwash. And I'll part by saying, you can't really design and operate a vertiport or an airport if you don't understand what it's serving, which is the aircraft or the eVTOL. But looking forward to getting stuck into this exciting discussion. Thanks, Jeremy.
Not a problem, Ricky. And I think we're going to go to the United States now, into Chicago area. I believe Daniel Mojica is from Vertiport Chicago. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the wonderful state of Illinois and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you everybody for participating today and logging in to meet everyone. My name is Daniel Mojica. I'm the Executive Director of Vertiport Chicago. We've been operating since 2015, and we're very proud to be able to help where we're actually located, which is the Illinois Medical District. It's one of the most innovative medical districts in the world, and we're very happy that we have a terrific team, and I really attribute all our accomplishments to our team and the way we've been able to build leadership roles, which ultimately led to we did receive the 2023 Heliport of the Year award by the Department of Transportation due to our safety protocols and our standards and our record. So currently we are a private facility, we're a private airport. However, we have a public mission, and what that is for any organ, any baby, any child, any patient that flies in or out of a medical helicopter, our vertiport does not collect a single penny. We have to staff expensive personnel 24 hours to be 65 in order to maintain those free missions. And we're very proud that we've been able to successfully support all the medical and life safety operations that come in and out, currently using helicopters, but in the future, we look forward to seeing eVTOLs coming in and out of our vertiport. And I'm very, very excited to continue to participate today. Thank you.
And thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate it. Now, I think last but not least, we're going to move to Germany, where Jörn Jager, you are in Germany right now, aren't you, Jörn?
Yes,
Yes, excellent. Why don't you let everybody know what you're up to? I know you used to work for Volocopter, but you've moved on to different things. Why don't you give a bit of your background and potentially what you're up to nowadays?
Right. Yeah, happy to do so. Thanks also from my side for having me here in this round. So just a brief overview of my background. Yeah, I have a bit of aviation background for more than 25 years, mainly in the airspace and vertiport or aerodrome domain. So my last work was for Volocopter, as you mentioned. I guess most of you know Volocopter as a company that designs and will certify VTOL aircraft fully electric, and also plans to operate it. And with that, Volocopter quite early recognized the need to build up or to at least make sure that the whole ecosystem is available. And with that, also the airspace and vertiport. And that is what I did in Volocopter for more than the last 5 years. So I had the pleasure to build up everything around airspace integration and vertiport requirements from our side and build up a team accordingly. And I worked there until March this year. So what we did in Volocopter together with a partner to create the first vertiport as early as 2019 in Singapore. That time it was not the fully functional vertiport, but it was one of the first actually to really have a full-size installation of a vertiport, and with all the learnings that we took from that already and from that early days. Of course, we also got to know some people here also present in the room and had some very great exchanges already at that time. We started to create our requirements document that we called the Vertiport Concept Design Handbook, specifically designed for urban missions, because Volocopter, as you may know, will start with the first aircraft in urban missions. And for that, we saw the need to also place requirements and design a vertiport that could actually fulfill the requirements coming from the OEM perspective, because everybody, when it comes to infrastructure, is always saying you need to have performance data of the aircraft. So this is what we know from the aircraft. And from that perspective, we had the idea to come up with that design handbook. And definitely I would support, and I think Ricky said it before, it's important to know the aircraft and just design the infrastructure from that perspective, and know the performance, what is different to a helicopter, because many people think eVTOLs or VTOLs in general are very much the same as helicopters. Yes, in a sense they are, but at the same time they are not. Then, of course, you also need to know, and I fully agree, again, Ricky, to what you said. I don't want to repeat everything here, but the operations is key. So you need to understand how you approach, how you move the aircraft, how you charge the aircraft, what is the customer journey. And from that perspective, you can clearly have a better understanding of the vertiport design, first of all, but also to the operations. And second or thirdly, I would say vertiport is quite a new animal. So there are some regulations in place for heliports, and authorities around the world, of course, look what can be applied, and for a good reason. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but make use of existing regulations. So also the design has to comply with that, while in the same time, there are new developments when it comes to regulations and standards ongoing in Europe and the US and other parts of the world. We know that. So whatever is possible to integrate already with new regulations, of course, we also implemented in that design. I think that is 3 quite important topics that we need to have in mind when it comes to vertiport design. And yeah, the second part of my previous career was also to implement routes for our first VTOL operations, not only for test purposes, as we did around the world, as you may have known. Also in Dubai, we were there quite early with the first test flights. We flew in Singapore, in Europe, several places, also in the US, in Oshkosh. And the Volocopter plans to start also operations early in Europe, in Paris and Rome specifically. So that was also what I was involved in here, to really design, agree the routes with the authorities to fly VTOLs commercially in the cities. So that's a bit of my background. And again, thanks for having me, and I give back to you, Jeremy.
Thanks. It's actually a pleasure having you all here today. I think I'm going to jump into the first question, and I think I'm going to turn to Clem, since he's not spoken very much for the past couple of minutes. But we hear a lot of terms. We hear advanced air mobility. We're hearing regional air mobility, urban air mobility, innovative air mobility. We're focusing in on urban air mobility today, but what's the difference between all of these, and how do vertiports fit into this whole scheme?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Look, not many people use urban air mobility anymore. It seems to be advanced air mobility seems to be the catch-all phrase that covers all sorts of aircraft, whether it's eVTOL, eSTOL, and all sorts of missions, whether it's hopping around on city buildings, city rooftop buildings, or going longer distances. So, I mean, I prefer the advanced air mobility as a catch-all phrase. I think that seems to be what's developed. But certainly, you can break that down, and I think the regional air mobility pieces are going to be very different to the urban ones. Primarily because it's going to be different aircraft that are going to be suitable for the longer range. Most of the OEMs that are building fully electric aren't going to be suitable for the very long range regional activity that we're anticipating in Australia, which is why our subsidiary airline Wilbur Air, we're very excited about a partnership with Electra Aero, which is a STOL aircraft, and it's a hybrid aircraft. I think it's got about 1,000-kilometer range. So that's going to be really suitable for regional air mobility, but not so suitable for the inner urban stuff. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm going to turn to Ricky to see if he has a different view on what urban air mobility is, and how maybe vertiports fit into the scheme, and how maybe the urban airport fits into all of this.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I kind of figured you might jump to me next. I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of terminology and acronyms in aviation generally, and I think urban air mobility, is still, in my view, the most important kind of terminology, because ultimately that's where the demand is, right? So the demand, the paying customers who are going to fill these 4 to 6 to 9 seats, they're going to come from urban areas, and it is advanced air mobility. It's an electric aircraft flying around downtown. That's super advanced. But ultimately, for this industry to be a success, it has to be, it's got to be bedded into urban environments. And some of the first work we did for Airbus back in 2017 was helping them understand their different types of aircraft and how they fit in to different types of built environment. And my background as an architect, planner, designer, there are 6 different transects that make up any built environment, from the urban core, a bit like downtown where the towers are, Canary Wharf, suburban, and all the way to your farmhouse. And so having a solution that really fits in to all those different segments of how our cities all over the world, there's always six transects. How we fit into those cities is going to be key. And then ultimately, it's going to be about business viability. And so that's where you need to serve populations who want to get from A to B. And when we did as Jeremy mentioned, when we did our proof of concept backed by the UK government in Coventry, that was right downtown. It was next to a railway station. It was next to high-rise towers and a city centre where 500,000 people work and live. And having that intermodal ability to connect from a train or a car, charge your EV, and then connect to an eVTOL, I think that is going to be super important for the business viability. And in order for you to do that, we're going to have compact, highly efficient, new types of infrastructure that specifically serve this advanced type of aircraft. And that's where a lot of our energy and IP has gone into. So yeah, I think urban air mobility planning in urban environments, even in airports, they're still considered urban. It's still a super important aspect, and that's what we focus all of our work on, to make sure that we can fit in where ultimately others won't be able to. And in terms of, Jeremy, just in terms of regional, we're also working with hybrid electric eVTOLs. We have a close partnership with Honda, and that's the kind of aircraft that's going to get you further distances more efficiently. But still, they want to land in urban locations as well, because that's where the demand is, where people live and work. And regional air mobility in kind of unused airfields, the problem is going to come from a business perspective. When you land there, how are you getting to your end destination? and what's the business case for taxi operators and other types of non-aeronautical opportunities to make that kind of that location viable, right? So I think it's all got to do with, you know, the most efficient use of your capex, but the most efficient operation that is the safest, that fits in, that community can buy into it, planners can sign it off, and then the operator of the vertiport and the eVTOL can make some money out of it, because otherwise, you know, it won't be sustainable. So I think urban air mobility for me gets my vote.
Excellent, thanks for that. I'm going to turn to Jorn next. And Jorn, obviously working for Volocopter, a two-seater eVTOL multi-copter, planning to use those obviously intercity, so using it for urban air mobility. How are we going to fly between vertiports in an urban area? How do you envision the routes that you talked about earlier working between the two different vertiports, or a vertiport and airport, let's say?
Yeah, so the airspace is very specific in each city. So that is something I think we have to recognize. There's hardly a solution that fits all. So we know the congested airspace, and that is true for most of the mega cities, where I would agree is the highest demand here. We have to see how we can establish principles to fly. So I think one thing, and that refers back to the performance of the aircraft, is that we can actually take advantage of the usually better performance of VTOL aircraft by having steeper climb out and also approach angles. So we can place actually a vertiport in locations in also dense urban environments where heliport would not fit into because of the glide slopes or the approach and departure slopes of the aircraft. And also the noise signature of the aircraft is much better than helicopters. We know nobody wants to have a helicopter in the city and not above his or her rooftop because of the noise mainly, but that is something VTOL aircraft are much better. And also from the safety perspective, VTOL aircraft, looking specifically at the European certification requirements, but it is, I think, also true and will be true for the ones in other parts of the world, are much higher than for helicopters. That actually allows to fly these aircraft in urban environments. That is, first of all, one of the things. And once we are in the air, then of course there's a bit of question: are there existing routes for helicopters, for example? And there are also these two school of thoughts. One saying, yes, we should follow these routes because they are there. People are used to it. We know what's going on. We have obstacle clearance and so on. Whereas the other opinion is rather, no, let's get away from these routes. And I think there are good reasons for both opinions. I would rather favor the second, to be honest, because we could deconflict and strategically separate traffic from existing traffic if airspace allows. Also, the flight height is usually lower than with existing helicopter operations. So I think, yes, we have to look in very much detail to existing airspace in the cities, but the principle is climb out very quickly, steep, fly rather low. Of course, making sure we have enough obstacle clearance. And the same is then true, of course, at the other end when we land at the vertiport again. So that is maybe something I could say in general, and the rest is quite specific. And also to create separate corridors. Most people at least can think of corridors much easier than we call it somehow separated airspace. That is also a concept that could work in the beginning, but may change over time, that we have a more kind of free airspace where we don't have dedicated corridors, but rather a kind of planning that would allow to deconflict the aircraft strategically and then allow them to fly where they want. And I think also when we believe in the whole thing of advanced air mobility, urban air mobility, more and more vertiports will be added. So new takeoff and landing points will come to the network. And I think we always have to think of a network rather than a point-to-point connection here. And that could become quite complex. So we have to make sure that the whole network is designed and the routes are designed in a way that there's enough flexibility to add new vertiports and takeoff and landing points. So that's maybe in a nutshell also the first learnings here from my perspective.
And that's a good point, Jörn, because I think it's the whole crux of this industry is breaking that nexus between place to start, replace a helicopter with an eVTOL, and that will happen quickly. But that's an evolution; it's not a revolution. And the revolution is really dependent on vertiport companies like ours breaking that nexus and providing those new destinations. And I think we'll come up to what are the impediments to that. But, uh, really what the whole key to this industry is about, because it's happy to mind you as well.
No, that's a good point. And it kind of leads me into my next question. I'm going to turn to Daniel for this one because obviously Chicago has a vertiport. And it's really interesting. My question is can we leverage that existing infrastructure for eVTOL aircraft? And how are we going to start mixing, helicopter operations and eVTOL operations safely within that environment?
Yeah, we can certainly and absolutely leverage existing infrastructure with the condition that the proper feasibility studies are executed, right? The proper additional third parties come in to have redundancies. That never hurts to have an extra set of eyeballs. And for what? Again, we always come back to safety, right? If currently our vertiport is being recognized for its ability to save lives, we don't want to be the ones to contribute to the opposite of that. And with that being said, I truly believe that the way, I mean, look at how things now. I mean, I guess it does depend for every city, but for example, right now Chicago is approving a casino, right? They're not approving 3 or 4 casinos at the same time. There's usually a queuing process. So I suspect it would be the same thing if and when we have multiple vertiports being applied at the buildings department for establishing these new locations. I think there would be a lot of conversations with local stakeholders. I know we are very proud that for almost everything we do, we bring in all our neighbors, our stakeholders, the local governments. And that's actually a really good segue into my next point. I feel when I have conversations with vertiport folks, it is often the word social acceptance, right? It's mostly often categorized under the challenge vertical or the hurdles vertical. But for us, how we've been able to successfully, get this place built and approved back in 2012, 2013, is because we took that, and instead of having that as a challenge, we made that our first opportunity. And how did we do that? We had enthusiasm and a lot of energy to communicate to our neighbors, our stakeholders, all the hospitals near us, that this is an amenity. This is a great solution to local issues, whether it's congestion or response times or travel times for organs and patients. It's not a secret. Chicago has a lot of has been in the news a lot for crime. They just announced additional investment from the city to add additional aircraft. And I can see this repeating within the next, 5 to 10 years when these eVTOLs become available, instead of helicopters, them having eVTOLs. I think it's very important to leverage existing infrastructure, but really with the consideration of having, being open to additional recommendations and or bids for solutions, whether it's additional safety protocols and or equipment in order to sustain the operation.
Brilliant. And I completely agree with you. Being a regulator, obviously safety is one of those key aspects when coming and designing a vertiport from scratch. It's also key on any aerodrome that we see today, whether it's an existing heliport, whether it's going to be a new build in the middle of the city vertiport, or it's something at an existing aerodrome. But I know, Ricky, you're building a lot of safety aspects into your design. I know you've released some really interesting information on outwash and downwash over the past little while. Can you maybe go into that just maybe a little bit? I'll let you speak about that, and let us know what difficulties you might have found building a vertiport in an urban area.
Sure, of course. So yeah, I mean, I'll start with the second point. I think, you know, building anything in an urban area is really hard, like really hard. Building transport infrastructure is extremely difficult. And so, yeah, the challenges were immense when we did Coventry, because it's the first time it had been done. And that was then the first fully operational vertiport. You know, it's slightly different to the one in Chicago, obviously. But it was the first time it had been done in a very complex urban environment, but also a complex airspace environment. We had to build our own ATZ within Coventry Airport's flight restriction zone next to Birmingham International's one. So the challenges are always there. And that's where I think, you know, having a background in urban design, architecture design, and building infrastructure, that really helps to you know, chart the path towards these new types of infrastructure developments. I think from a safety perspective, you know, we've done a lot of work on a number of things, on batteries, on energy, on charging, on fire. We had our FATO certified, you know, for the eVTOLs that were flying. We had 150 flights take off and land successfully and safely, all with CAA, with your colleagues' approvals, Jeremy. But I think, you know, as was discussed earlier, flying is the safest form of transport, right? It's the safest way to move, to travel, and there's a reason for that, right? And so, you know, for instance, Mike Whitaker, who opened our vertiport in Coventry, he's now the administrator for the FAA, and his number one priority is to focus on safety. So, you know, when you're designing infrastructure, particularly for an aircraft like an eVTOL, you know, a lot of its challenges are to do with energy, battery, fires, and which we have a number of different solutions. We have various fire mitigation measures. We have various fire suppression systems built into our solutions, depending on whether it's hybrid, fully electric. We had off-grid hydrogen, green hydrogen power to the vertiport, completely off-grid, so not adding an extra burden to the national grid, which is the same problem around the world. But I think the biggest issue with the eVTOL is, you know, beyond the financial viability of a 4-seat aircraft and the range, is the downwash. And I think, you know, as Jörn said, and I'm glad that Jörn and I still align after all these years, it's not like a helicopter, right? A helicopter's downwash is very well understood. It's very well defined, you know, for many, many years. But an eVTOL's downwash is far less understood, very complex. And the work that the CAA did, which is excellent, we built on that work. We spent a lot of time and money and R&D. And what we found is that, you know, with this close proximity of a atypical eVTOL with 8 rotors that tilt, at the point of hovering just before landing and taking off, we're seeing hurricane force type winds, right, from these vertical flow structures. And so, you know, when they hit the ground, when there's nowhere for them to go other than outwards, they will just kind of continue along the infinite ground plane. And so that's going to have a big impact on space, which is a key thing when we're talking about urban air mobility. If you need more space for that really strong downwash to subside, that just is going to cost more money. You're going to need more land. It's also going to have an impact on turnaround time, because it won't be safe for personnel, staff, to guide that aircraft in, to have passengers on the airfield, have eVTOL waiting. So all of that is going to add up to more time. And you know, the impact on the infrastructure itself, we've seen lots of videos and you know, cool renders where you've got an eVTOL taking off in front of a glass facade of a building, and that simply isn't viable. So what we've been carefully trying to do is release some of our R&D that shows some of the negative impacts of this downwash and outwash, and our solution as to how to try and capture that, which we've simulated very successfully, how we can capture and mitigate the speed and the extent of that downwash, which therefore means these aircraft could land in dense urban locations without safety concerns to the neighboring community, to staff, passengers, pilot, and the aircraft. And anyone interested to find out more, we're happy to you know, take that into much more detail offline.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ricky. I've got a set number of questions in there in a certain order, but I'm jumping around because I think the discussion's going very well. And you were talking about safety, obviously from a regulatory standpoint, it would be good to get a feel of, obviously there's a regulatory framework being developed in different states around the world. But what are the important parts of that regulatory framework in order to make vertiports happen in an urban area? I'll throw that one out to Jorn actually, because he has his hand up.
All right, thanks. Yes, I was just wanted to add something to what you, Ricky, said. I think it's absolutely true. The downwash, outwash topic is quite complex, needs to be investigated, and there's some good work going on. At the same time, I think it's also important, although all the aircraft are called VTOL or even eVTOL, the concepts are quite different. And from that, we also have to say that, yes, the aircraft have different characteristics. And that brings me back to the point I made in my introduction, that we need to understand the performance of the aircraft. And that not only applies to, for example, climb performance and range and turning radius and things like that. But one is the outwash and downwash characteristic. And of course, there are concepts with fewer rotors, and they have to lift quite heavy aircraft, so that obviously, that is physics, creates quite a lot of downwash, whereas, for example, there are other concepts with a number of rotors and lightweight aircraft that have less impact when it comes to downwash. So with that, I think it's also kind of challenge for a vertiport design to find a solution. On the one hand, I think you can always find solutions by just adding space, right? So that is when you have a lot of space available, you just create a larger area and you say that's safe now because you have a lot buffer around the aircraft. But that, I think, is somehow in conflict with the available space in an urban environment, and sometimes it's not needed. So I think this is something also I would like to mention here. The whole concept of vertiport design has to be flexible in a way that it can accommodate different concepts. So for aircraft that maybe don't need this high building infrastructure also to counteract downwash, and we have other aircraft that have actually this impact, and we have to make sure, exactly as you said, Ricky, that people on the ground are not affected and other aircraft. So I think that is a bit also of a challenge for the whole vertiport topic, and maybe that even creates some limitations for aircraft to operate at certain vertiports. I mean, we know it from the current aviation that we have weight mainly as a dominant factor to say, okay, that's an airport classified for a huge aircraft, category E or F or whatever. And we have aircraft and airports that go together with smaller requirements. Just take example London City Airport, where also we have some limitations here. And the same may apply to vertiports when it comes to downwash. That was more the topic, sorry, I still wanted to add here to that discussion, because there's also sometimes a tendency, I noticed, that of course in the beginning, everybody is missing some experience. We tend to go for the most comprehensive solution, but that would actually limit also certain potential that we see with VTOL operations in urban environments specifically. Now coming back to regulation,
I think that's
sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought you'd finished.
Sorry, no, I wanted to just come back to the question, Jen, that you asked me regulation. So I had also the chance to be involved in the EASA rulemaking task for vertiports. So we went through all the topics there, identified also that downwash topic as one, and the other one, Ricky, you mentioned it, is rescue firefighting. So the whole electric charging infrastructure and handling of batteries. There are different concepts, swapping batteries, onboard charging batteries. That adds a new need for also finding solutions to deal safely with the topic. And I think, obstacle limitation surfaces, what are the requirements for obstacle limitations around the vertiport? This, I think, from the top of my head, are the main topics need to be addressed. And for firefighting, I still see no solution that is agreed in principle. I know several organizations are working on that and coming up with solutions here. And yes, from the vertiport, I can say we built in Germany for Volocopter, the headquarters. That was also one of the first, so to say, operational vertiports, although mainly for test purposes. The one in Coventry, I guess, Ricky, you had quite a number of discussions on that. I know, Jeremy, you were working, and ICAO will be looking at this. So I think there are a lot of activities ongoing, but these are the ones I think are most worth mentioning here.
Yeah, Clem, you had a comment that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, look, I was just in terms of the regulatory side of things, this is my sort of pet topic because it frustrates the hell out of me as an ex-politician that I can see that this is a political decision that needs to be made and a regulatory decision, and that's to basically create a new land use called a vertiport. And nowhere in the world has this happened. So, and to be fair to those who are trying, we don't actually, the aircraft aren't here yet, so it's very hard to actually make that assessment. And as Jorn points out, there's going to be lots of different types of eVTOLs and will have different characteristics. But ultimately, the point we need to get to is that it is easier to get a vertiport approved than get a heliport approved. And once we do that, then we can get the multitude of sites because and the argument, I suppose, is going to be mainly based around the noise, the equity of access, the cleaner, greener mode of transport. All these things we hope will lead the community to be pushing the politicians to make these aircraft able to be landed in new places. But it is a very difficult situation we're at the moment, and I think it may actually be that we need to wait until we've got some aircraft flying so that people can actually see and hear them and make that call. Do we want these aircraft to be landing in shopping centres, on tops of buildings and everything else, where at the moment we're saying, no, we wouldn't allow a helicopter there. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, but it's one that we really need to solve if we are to actually provide the multitude of destinations. And I think there's a real opportunity there from governments, for governments. I mean, in Australia, we've got great policy support. CASA has released our air regulator, CASA has released vertiport guidelines not far behind the FAA and EASA. We've got strong policy support from our federal government, from multiple state governments. So there are all these high-level documents which are saying, yeah, we want this industry to happen, but no state government or local government, and this is the lower levels of government where the land use planning happens. This is where we need to get the support from them to change the rules and regulations to create this new land use called a vertiport. So the first jurisdiction that actually does that and demonstrates that it's going to be easier to get approval for than a vertiport, than a heliport, will probably find that the vast amounts of money that has been spent on the aircraft will pivot into those launch destinations, and I presume this is what's happening in Dubai. That they are. It's probably an easier place than most places in the world to make significant changes like that. And I don't have any direct knowledge on what's going on there, but I think that's what's going to have to happen to create the multitude of destinations that we all want.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Clem. So Daniel, running a vertiport that's already in existence, although be it for helicopters currently, but I know that you're working with a couple of the OEMs to start transporting people and passengers from your facility through to Chicago O'Hare. What other factors need to be considered when operating a vertiport in a city center? Obviously, you do this on a regular basis. What are some of the hurdles that you see now, and what are some of the hurdles that you might see in the future when operating vertiports?
I think, as I mentioned before, it's often to say that the number one hurdle is social acceptance. So we flipped that upside down and made that basically one of our top, outside of saving lives, our top priority, and really our number one value as well. And what do I mean by that? How we've been able to have the amazing support that we have now from our local aldermen, our local government, our neighbors, and all the stakeholders in our area, is we've really put forward building a workforce, right? A workforce predominantly comprised from perhaps the general public who come from underreserved areas, low income folks. So we're attacking it on all angles. We started internships for young teens, all the way to recruiting folks who maybe have never had experience in aviation, and we've basically done like a Trojan horse way of promoting advanced air mobility through providing jobs and workforce opportunities. And what that created is ultimately, instead of spending money on billboards or on cool videos, it created first-person understanding of, holy cow, a heliport. And now they know, oh, a heliport is also could be a future vertiport. So now we're at the point where we have, heads of hospitals that are near our vertiport, from the leadership of the Illinois Medical District to the local aldermans and even businesses in our area, calling us to do partnerships, to be able to promote youth programs and even come up with new programs that currently don't exist. We're currently talking to some universities now to add more value to their programs, right? And in exchange for them to provide some value for free at our local vertiport. And what that's creating is it's creating an ecosystem of awareness, an ecosystem of removing the walls to saying no without even trying to understand aviation or helicopters or eVTOLs. It opens up the opportunity for discussion. It opens up the opportunity for folks to listen with the intent to understand. And that's how we've been able to really successfully maintain our operations, increase our operations, and really now there's 100-acre intermodal right next to our vertiport. We're starting to have conversations from folks about planning the future of, cargo from O'Hare, flown over rail lines to come to Chicago. I mean, nothing's set yet, but that's what the workforce component has led to all these other terrific conversations that will eventually lead to more innovation. So that's one thing that I think has been very successful for our vertiport. And I share this with everyone because I think that's a really important thing to take to everyone's community, especially when they're trying to build something new.
No, that's excellent. And I really like the response and really like how social you're becoming to build the acceptance of a vertiport within a city. And maybe you can use a lot of your experiences there to help boost the acceptance and social acceptance globally. That is absolutely awesome. So vertiports are being built. Let's see, we have our vertiports, we're flying aircraft back and forth. How is this actually going to mitigate the congestion in cities? I'm going to start off with Ricky on that one.
Thanks, Jeremy. Just to pile in on Dan's point, I think it's excellent what you're doing, Dan. And I think the little bit that we saw 2 years ago in Coventry, just on that point quickly, if I could, Jeremy, we had 3,000 people, kind of just regular folks in Coventry, not kind of aviation enthusiasts, just regular folks, all couples, kids, and I remember a lot of them were very sad to see Air One go, and they were actually starting to ask, is this going to increase the value of my property? Because I just live down the road, right? Because there's a new form of cool infrastructure, and I can get to London in 20 minutes. And so I think all of that social side is really important. And I do agree with Dan. There has been a lack of investment in that in and of itself, actually. It's not about education. It's about just exposure and making this accessible. So fully support that. Jeremy, in terms of congestion, right? So it's a 4-seat aircraft, right? So it's going to help, but it's not going to completely solve the problem of congestion. I think the way that it can help is exactly what Dan just said as well, which is great to hear. There's a multimodal hub appearing next door. I think is to be in those locations where there's multimodal options, right? I think that's got to be key, and that kind of speaks to what Clem's been talking about land use planning. So there's no point, you're not going to help traffic if you have to drive 20 miles to get to a vertiport. That's just going to add to traffic. And so we were very careful when we picked our site in Coventry. And by the way, in 2 days' time, it'll be 2 years, the anniversary. So we'll be kind of making a big announcement on Thursday. But that site remains one of the perfect types of locations next to public transport, the main railway links. Next to it's got good highway connectivity, good access for EV charging. There's a bus station close by and lots of micro mobility. And I think that's the way it's going to help, right? If you can kind of provide another option as opposed to just getting in a car, I think that's going to be the best way. And then you save some emissions. You're not going to solve all of the emission problems, but also the key thing there is, I think, is not so much about congestion. It's also in my view, a lot about productivity and economic benefit, right? So if you're not sitting in a car stuck in traffic for 2 hours trying to get somewhere, and you can get there in 20 minutes, so your productivity as an individual, as an organization, as a city, as a country will just go up. And so that means a lot. And that's why the UK government, with the Future Flight plan, that's what they've put out, right? So they think there's going to be, over £40 billion economic benefit to the UK by integrating this form of transport. Yes, it will help some congestion, but actually it will help us be more productive and be better for everybody.
Yeah, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Ricky, with winding back this the mantra that a lot of us started with, perhaps saying this is a congestion busting thing, because it's really. I'll probably go a little bit further in doing a complete backflip, Ricky. I think it's not as a congestion busting thing. I think, as Ricky pointed out there, the aircraft take 4 people, and even if you've got 100 flying around a city, that's a tiny difference it could possibly make to congestion. So, and of course you've got potentially people driving to park at a vertiport as well. So I think that the argument is fairly paper thin, and I've found through sort of talking about it, I've sort of learned, and having been challenged myself about we all sort of drink the Kool-Aid a bit on this, and with all the pitch decks when it started out, and now I think we're starting to assess it, and we have to be realistic about it. This is not going to be congestion busting. It's not going to be the cost of an Uber. It's we're not going to be able to fly around at $3 a mile. This is it would all be great, and maybe there are some aspirations for the future, but I think we have to be realistic that this is just another form of transport to go into the mix, and it will be very, very functional and very useful for the people who can use it, and hopefully a lot of people can use it. It won't be like helicopters, which are really, really reserved for the super rich as a general form of transport, or the relatively rich for an experiential service, such as going out for lunch at a vineyard or something like that. But I think we need to be realistic that when this industry starts, the aircraft are not going to be any cheaper to buy. We all sort of thought a few years ago we were saying this, the aircraft are not going to be as expensive as helicopters. Now we know the front runners at least are going to be more expensive than helicopters to begin with. There are some of the other aircraft that are coming behind, perhaps smaller and will be more affordable. I noticed Dan's here online from Wisk, and their aircraft I think will ultimately take the pilot out, which will bring a cost saving, and also the aircraft is probably going to be less than the bigger eVTOLs being developed. But I think from a general proposition, I don't think it helps for us to be selling myths that this is all about congestion busting. I think we need to get away from that and just say, look, this is something that will develop, but it's going to take time. And I think people are happy for it to take time, because and I'm happy for it to take time, because we need the community to be drawn in. As Dan pointed out, we need them to grow to accept it and to love it, and say, well, I'm happy seeing these 10 aircraft flying around the city, and it doesn't really bother me. And if I could go to my local shopping centre and get on one, and there was more of them available, and I can afford to fly in them, even though they might not be as cheap as an Uber car, they're still reasonable. Then I think that's how it will grow, and it'll be a J curve, and I think that's probably the best way for it to happen. And we have to be very careful about getting too excited about the vision that might be decades in advance, and so allow everybody to catch up and let it evolve organically.
Excellent. Thanks, Clem. On to my next question. We're going to talk about the business models. Obviously, these vertiports aren't going to be built cheap. Building anything in an urban area is just definitely not cheap. So what kind of business models do you have to, quote the question, what kind of business models do you have established in order to, make this happen? And also, we need to start thinking about the charging infrastructure. It costs money to obviously bring in electricity to charge the aircraft, and support the high volume of charging that's going to be. So I'm going to leave this open to anyone if someone wants to jump on, but it'd be great to hear from all of you about different business models and then the charging infrastructure and how we're going to make that work.
I think the business models have to be fluid. I think you have to be able to pivot as economic changes occur throughout with the country or the world. We're very proud. We're getting maybe a couple knocks on our door every other week from folks interested in our operation. Some people spread the word that we're finally cash flow positive, and we're moving forward in the right trajectory. But a lot of that has to be for our ability that we were able to pivot in so many different ways and able to capture revenues across different lines. So that's my 2 cents. I can't really go in depth into what our model is, but I definitely think everyone should find a way to be able to not count on just landing fees and charging revenues, because as Clem just pointed out, we're not going to have 1,000 aircraft flying on day one. It's going to be a handful, and it's going to be, as he said, a J curve. So we have to be able to maintain an operation. That's why I love what Ricky said. Our facility is about 4 hectares, 10 acres. So if we would have built smaller, we would have been cash flow positive a lot sooner. But luckily, thank God that we were able to maintain it. And a lot of that has to do with our team, because they see the vision, they live it every day, they come in to save lives, and that energy transcends into their customer service and into our full work environment. So those are my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, look, and I think I totally agree. I think it all starts with having a small footprint, right? Which is the most sustainable way to start. If you can have a small footprint, it costs you less to build, your return on investment, will come back quicker. But at the same time, if you have a small footprint, you've got to straddle the capacity issue. So you need to have a highly efficient operation, which is what we've created, and that's our entire model. But also having designed, built, and helped clients operate airports. It's not just commercial airports where there's thousands of people, hundreds of aircraft. It's not just the ticket sales. It's not just the landing fees. It's all the other stuff that keep the lights on. Actually, it's the non-aeronautical revenues, and I think there's an opportunity here, and that's what we've also invested in. With our subsidiary company we've called Urban Air Choice. We've got over 40 brands that want to showcase products, not like big stores, in our compact footprints, but another way to reach out to customers and top up some of those revenues, because the numbers of aircraft will be small to begin with. Yes, they'll grow, but then also as the number of aircrafts grow, because there's more people kind of starting to use them over time, you then want to have an infrastructure that you can extend, that you can expand. So you've got something from day one, which suits day one. And for us, that's our modular system. Start with one vertical airfield and a FATO, maybe one hangar. Then in year 2, add another hangar on top, because we've got a stackable system. And then maybe in year 3, you can buy another couple of hangars and bolt them on. And that's how we've built our model, so that it's viable. Not only from sustainable viability, but also financially as well. And then you can manage your return on your investment and get to that positive cash flow quicker. And Dan, would love to have a look at your guys' operation and see whether we can collaborate and help in any way.
I think he said he wasn't going to tell you, so you might not get that information. No, well, Jeremy, look, just to add to that, I am concerned about the business model for Vertiports. So I think that the building behind me, was probably $10 million plus to build. It's appropriate for a high-profile city site, but will probably be built by a government that would build a beautiful building like that. I'm becoming more and more realistic about what the business model looks like, and I think the business model for most vertiports would be to have the absolute minimum, a safe place to land, And there may be places where, particularly if you're having, focusing on an urban environment where you could have a hub and spoke arrangement where you only have charging at one the center of the spoke, but you can drop off in other places without charging, simply a safe place to land that an aviation expert has deemed to be appropriate. So a vertiport like that, a vertistop, you could make for not a large investment, and I think not having to provide charging facilities is going to be significantly reduce the capital cost. I mean, looking into this, it's frightening when you look at what a vertiport actually will cost to build, and the limitations of aircraft having to sit and charge, the limitations on space, how many can you physically get through. It's going to be very hard if we're something has to give here in terms of if we're trying to create low-cost air travel. We can't be having landing fees costing $100 when we're trying to get a ticket significantly less than that. So how you do that is difficult, and I'm actually flipping it on its head here. I'm telling the property developers who are interested that no, I probably won't be paying you rent to build a vertiport. If you want access to your site, then you're probably going to have to pay for the vertiport, and we will provide that. We will bring customers to your door. We will provide the service for your visitors, for your tenants, and that's a cost that property developers have to wear. And I think that's really where it's going to have to go, because I think it will be very hard to make a full-blown vertiport stack up. So the property development industry and the governments as well are going to have to come to the party so that we can focus on delivering the service and partnering with the aircraft and the operators.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Clem. And Jorn, I'm going to turn to you as well, because obviously charging an aircraft volocopter may be a little bit different than any other OEM out there. Why don't you throw your comments in?
Right. Yeah, I think for the business model of the vertiport operators, much was said, that I cannot add much to it as well. I think, yes, the initial costs have to be low, and also the question is who pays for it in the end. And of course, you need two vertiports to have one route, so it's not only one vertiport, but even two. And in the end, the ticket has to pay the costs. And for that reason, I think, yes, there's an interest to have it rather low. And again, also the question is, do we consider this kind more an aviation mode of transport, or is it rather a taxi? So if you compare to ground-based taxi or a cab ride, you also don't expect the taxi to stop at a booth or at a station that is very luxurious. And I think in this sense, we can also consider that there's fast interest to save time and have the minimum infrastructure. And then, of course, depending on the customer group, you could also define the vertiport with a bit more facilities. But specifically for the charging, yes, that is a challenge for various reasons. First, availability of the energy and the power there. And second, what is the concept? Now speaking here still on behalf of Volocopter somehow, the concept was to swap the batteries with the first aircraft that will be certified very soon. And that creates also the need for a specific infrastructure there. We have found a solution to bring it in a box. So all we need is a power cable, and that's it. And of course, maybe some water for rescue firefighting services. So there's a solution available because we noticed the need to have something available when the aircraft is ready. And sometimes it takes quite a long time to establish these charging infrastructure on site. I think over time we will see a more standardized charging, the same as electric vehicles on the ground, that not every supplier has its own plug and own infrastructure. That will bring down unit cost. And I think that is also something we should consider for each of the vertiport. I think it's in the minds of all the vertiport operator. Very often the term is used as agnostic, so that whatever aircraft will come, we make best use of the infrastructure that is not tailored and reserved specifically for one operator or for one type of aircraft or for several. Although I would think, and maybe that's a bit of a point of discussion, there is certainly a sweet spot because if you want to open it for all the different kind of aircraft and concepts, then you have to provide sometimes a zoo of ground support equipment. And given the low footprint, specifically for urban air mobility. I think there's certainly a limit for operating a number of aircraft. So I think there's definitely some benefit in having a smaller number of different aircraft, but at the same time make best use of the facility in order to bring down the cost for individual operations, reducing turnaround times. I think, again, Ricky, you mentioned already, a high frequency of operation will also allow for lower cost for the individual aircraft and in the end for the passenger. But it doesn't end, and maybe that's the last thing I want to add here, not only at the vertiport itself, at least the concept that we developed and it is applied in Europe, and I think it is in a way is the same for other regions. We have to think also of diversion locations. That is sometimes forgotten. And of course, if you look at your specific vertiport, you don't care about these kind of sites, but this is something also an operator needs to plan. What happens in case the aircraft cannot make it back to the origin vertiport or destination vertiport and no other vertiport? So there has to be a landing site, and that is also, it's not a vertiport, it's a kind of diversion location, I would call it for the time being. That adds cost, that adds somebody that needs to take care of it. And I saw also some questions in the chat here, for example, weather observation systems or weather information. I think that's a quite important point, of course. And you need systems at the vertiports that maybe not so much relevant for the vertiport operation, but important for the VTOL operator to monitor the situation, the meteorological situation at the vertiport, but also along the way. So you need to have very good meteorological weather data along the way. And the same is true for communication and navigation and surveillance infrastructure. That adds to the cost that all the operations has to bear. So I think, yes, that's quite a challenge. And we have to see how each region and location will deal with that and how the cost is distributed. And if in the end, really the customer has to pay, so the flying passenger, all these costs, that is quite a challenge.
Brilliant. And thanks, guys, for that. That's the charging infrastructure is something that gets brought up a lot. I have a lot of discussions on how they're going to introduce it at existing aerodromes or in even future vertiports. So obviously, it's not just going to be electricity in the future. I know that there are going to be some hybrid versions, bringing in hydrogen, mixing SAF, mixing fuel, et cetera, et cetera. So great points, great topic, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss those more as time goes on. We have a few minutes left, and I'm actually going to turn to the audience for some questions. So if you've been listening over the past hour and you have any questions you want to ask specifically, please feel free to put them in the chat area. I have one question. So how different or similar are vertiports for UAM services with helicopter services now? So how are they similar and how are they going to be different? Obviously, both vertically take off and land. But are there different services they're looking at? Are there going to be capabilities where helicopters will eventually just disappear? We won't use them anymore. What are your views on that going forward? I'll actually turn to Daniel first, since you run a heliport currently, a vertiport, but obviously for helicopters.
Yeah, I absolutely think I think it would be a while for helicopters to be completely out of the picture. Currently, some of the missions that we operate in our vertiport are construction. So we have the big Sikorsky air crane that visits us often, and talking about downwash, man, that is a downwash on a helicopter. So for missions such as that, I think they'll continue to use helicopters until the eVTOLs have, if not equal or better outputs similar to that. Additionally, we do service a lot of Coast Guard and military. So again, same scenario. I think until the aircraft are compatible to those helicopter outputs, it's going to be a while for those to be phased out. But it's not impossible, and I think it's just a matter of time and further development, which is it's also exciting in itself.
And I think just to add to that, I think the one of the biggest differences is to do with the noise, right? So the perceived sound of a helicopter is just so big. I mean, when the kids are playing football in the park and the US president flies across Regent's Park in London, to go to his place, his residence, you know, everyone stops playing football, and this is in England, and to look up the helicopter. And I think that kind of defines where helicopters fly and who can fly them and where they fly. And I think that will be dramatically different when you consider eVTOLs, because yes, they will be quieter, but you know, they won't be silent. There's a new type of sound that one has to deal with, and that's a lot of again, a lot of R&D and work that we've been doing in the perception of that sound and how to mitigate that. So I think that leads to slightly different solutions, and also opens up new locations, right? So you'll see kind of heliports, which are vertiports for electric aircraft, in locations where you would not see heliports. And at the same time, what we're doing the flip side, you know, just to agree with Dan again, is, you know, there'll be helicopters around for a while. And so some of our recent downwash stuff, Dan, can really dramatically help helicopters as well. So we've designed that pattern to benefit elevated or at grade FADOs for a multitude of different aircraft. And so therefore you can make heliports for existing helicopters. You can make those more efficient as well. So I think that's really exciting, because they will be around for a while. But they are very different animals. And then there's obviously charging and refueling and so on, with fire issues. So it just naturally leads, you know, again, back to what Jorn and I have been saying, that you've got to understand what the aircraft is and what its performance criteria are to provide the supportive infrastructure. I'll hand it over to Clem or Jorn.
I think the use cases for eVTOLs, the first use cases are going to be replacing helicopters on missions that people are currently happy to pay, you know, whatever they pay at the moment. So, for instance, in Australia, you know, people are very happy to pay $500 once a year or once in a lifetime to go have an experience, go out to lunch at a tourism hotspot, and you know, they're routes that are you know, tried and true. And Daniel obviously has sightseeing trips, and he'll know that, you know, he can replace, you know, still charge the same, or maybe even charge more for the experience of going in a modern aircraft. But I think they're the use cases that will work. I don't think to do purely taxi work is going to be a lot harder, because people will pay a lot more for an experience than they will for transport. And I know this, having started the first water taxi on the river behind me, the Yarra River in Melbourne, when I was 20, and it was spectacularly unsuccessful as a water taxi, because it was slow. You couldn't get anywhere at any great speed. It was more expensive. But the same people who would balk at being charged $200 for me to go up the river and pick them up and drop them at work. Of course, it's too expensive to do as a regular mode of transport. They're very happy to spend $200 with a bottle of wine and go out for a cruise and watch the sunset. So I think that these tourism uses are the high paying uses that will work. And in terms of a prediction, I think we're going to see the rise of the essentially glorified Ferris wheels, where there'll be a tourism use that these smaller aircraft will be for basically taking you up in the air for 5 or 10 minutes and back again to look at the sights. And I think, you know, that's a use case which would be high paying. It would provide people with the thrill of flight, but it wouldn't be limited by the cost would be kept down, and the capabilities of the aircraft, given the battery constraints, would all be accommodated in that sort of use. So that'd be an interesting one, I think, is the very short tourism use to see a city from above.
Right. Yeah, maybe just to add two aspects from my side here. So one is that compared to helicopters, at least when we apply to the EASA SC-VTOL certification baseline, requiring a very, very high safety standard. So for a fatal error that is 10 to the power minus 9, which is 100 times higher than compared to helicopters. So I think that should be also considered when VTOL aircraft, at least when they are certified to the EASA certification guidelines, can fly into areas where helicopters are not allowed, not only because of noise, that's one of the very important arguments, of course, but also due to safety reasons. If you have a one-engine helicopter, then obviously if that fails, you have a problem. Whereas with the VTOL aircraft, you have a much higher reliability, and you can fly actually in these regions where a helicopter is not supposed to fly. And second, all the reasons and use cases for commercial operations are absolutely valid and true. But I think there's also quite room for operations for rescue missions or for also first aiders. So, for example, now still also having in mind example of Volocopter and the cooperation we have with the rescue of a helicopter operator. In many cases, for example, the doctor has to go to an accident place very rapidly, and then only the helicopter can bring that person, the doctor, to that site. So they are very much interested to have a collaboration with Volocopter to have that VTOL aircraft able and available quickly to bring at least one person for a highly obviously desirable mission to the place. So I think there are some other reasons when helicopters are used only with one or two people for things that can be done with the VTOL aircraft. So I think there are some use cases beyond the commercial operations that was mentioned before.
Excellent. Thanks, John. Thanks to the panel for answering that question. I am going to turn to the audience. One of the questions that has come up is how wide is the demand and the acceptance from community to actually use advanced air mobility or urban air mobility? I'll leave that open to the first person who speaks.
I mean, I think, from our experience, it was a very positive reaction in the UK, in Coventry, which we were actually, to be honest, we were quite surprised about. But, once made accessible and people can experience, what this new type of mode of transport would be like in the process, and the benefits that it offers, I think the reaction was immensely unanimously positive. And we talked a little bit earlier about the people getting excited about the upside and property values, and then there's land capture value, land value capture. Sorry, get my words the right way around. So I think if people and communities can see the benefit, and particularly in underserved areas, right, where there's not sufficient public transportation connection or links. I think there's a lot of value that advanced air mobility can add. I mean, Coventry City Council's interest was to do with, we did a lot of cargo drone flights, eVTOL flights, and that was all to do with trying to reduce some of the number of delivery vans that are driving all around Coventry. And so there's a multitude of different factors, and I think that multiplicity of functionality of a vertiport that provides not only passenger taxi flights, but can also be a pickup point for cargo, can act as a continued safe flight and landing zone, as Jan just mentioned. But then it's also part of the community where you can go and hang out. We had a lot of people who just came to check it out and have a coffee and spend a bit of money, which will help the bottom line. But it becomes part of the community. And I think if done correctly, there's a lot of upside beyond just actually the flying bit. It becomes an amenity, which then also adds to safety in communities where transportation connectivity is in many parts of the UK, but also across Saudi. I mean, we're on a call in Saudi effectively, and I think as these new cities start to be designed and built, there's an amazing opportunity to design out the roads, right, and start from scratch and build in, a replicable, affordable vertiport network, which is bedded in from the ground up. And I know that's the mission for a lot of these giga projects. And I think it's a very noble vision, and I think it is achievable if done properly with the right people involved.
Yeah, I think we've got a real problem with community acceptance, and it's great to hear, Dan, how you've managed to have some success with being embedded in the community and accepted. But my experience is that people hate helicopters. If you're not in a helicopter, you generally, people don't like them. They're just seen as noisy, expensive things that rich people get around in, and that's a real problem. And then at the other end, drones are seen as annoying toys that can be bought by anybody and flying irresponsibly, invade my privacy, have that horrible whiny noise, and potentially drop on my head. So we're in a pincer move between the cheap drones that people hate and the big expensive helicopters that people also hate. So I think we've really got our work cut out for us to sell this to the community. And this is something that's going to be, every one of us is going to have to be doing this. And to a large extent, we're out there, promoting it sort of relatively blind to the benefits, because most of us have had limited experience of actually seeing these aircraft flying, other than what you see on YouTube and you might see at an air show. So it is going to be a challenge, and I think it's a challenge that the whole industry needs to take up. And I'd love to see the OEMs, providing aircraft, for demonstrations, perhaps in conjunction with the, vertiport companies, so that we can actually, have community days and people can actually sort of see and hear them and get a better feel for, what the impact is. So they need to know the impact is less than the impacts that they don't like about helicopters and drones, and they also need to know, here are the benefits that Ricky's spoken about. So these two things need to come together, and then we need people to actually love them and want them. And that's when, from putting on my ex-politician's hat, that's when the community wants something, that's when it happens. So the political support out there could evaporate in an instant if the community says they don't want these things. Politicians will backtrack, and that policy document they put out, no, we've revised that because people really don't want these things. So they're the challenges that we've got, and they're not insurmountable, but it is going to be a slow process, and one where we need to bring the community along.
Excellent. Thank you, Clem. Lots of good questions coming in this afternoon, and I'm reading or trying to read through all of them really quickly. But I'm going to take a fairly long one and shorten it down. How do we balance revenue versus safety? I think these are two really important aspects of a vertiport. We want to make money off of them at the end of the day, but how do we make sure that they are equally as safe and we're not cutting corners? So I'll leave that open to the floor.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that was from Giancarlo. I was just reading that as well. It's the most important question. I mean, obviously, I would say buy an urban airport, because we've designed for that, right? You land elevated where it's safer. The noise perception is less. It's best for the pilot, situational awareness, and then we isolate the aircraft from the passengers from the boarding gates, and then we move the aircraft to the shortest possible distance where the charging systems are. So, and we deal with the downwash and outwash in a very unique, patented way. But all of that, which is driven by safety, is also done on a very small footprint, which is all to do with viability and profitability. And so then, if you've got like we have a very compact footprint, we've got kind of the ability to have like 17 movements an hour from a typical vertiport, and that's because we have an automated system, and the aircraft is moving the shortest possible distance, right? And so then you've got the opportunity to have more movements per hour on a smaller footprint, which then just means you're going to end up having a bit more money in the bank at the end of each day, supported by non-aeronautical activities, which don't need to be vast. We're not talking about large-scale duty-free, but we do know, and we do have over 40 brands who are willing to pay just to showcase a bit of their product within this vertiport, because it's a new type of customer for them. So it is a balancing act, but I think for us it is safety first, and then that leads on to having the benefits in our solution, or having a compact footprint, which helps the bottom line.
We've also got the safety of the actual aircraft, I think, which is something that is largely out of our control. And Ricky's highlighted what a vertiport can do to be safe, and obviously, that's a critical part of the equation. But the real problem we've got, I think, is that we've got this. It's a bit like Wright Brothers days out there at the moment, with 1,000 aircraft in development. Now, most of those won't get through. A small number will, but if there are accidents, then it could be devastating for the industry if these are perceived as unsafe machines to fly in, and so that's a real danger that we've got. And the bar is going to be a lot higher than other forms of transport.
That's how she likes it.
You know, we'll end up going to you know, after this meeting, some of us might get in the car and drive home. Now, and you may end up being a statistic that's inevitable, that you could be one of the people who dies on the roads this year. And
she say that's how.
So, but it is you know, a much higher standard that is being put to for these aircraft, and I think it's rightly so. But you know, my concern is that, you know, when there are you know, or if there are issues, then it's going to have a very you know, devastating impact, which you know, could be fatal to the whole industry if that's where you know, the community pulls their support. I'm reminded of Henry Ford had a flying car not long after he built the Model T, and he abandoned that project because of a crash that killed a pilot that he was particularly friendly with, and you know, he couldn't handle the impact of that, and decided that it wasn't something he wanted to pursue. So yeah, we are relying very much on the OEMs, and so that's why it is good that it's so hard to get commercially certified, because if they do get through, we know that they are going to be you know, safe aircraft, and that's why it's a bit of a worry when, you know, there's you know, aircraft flying around which haven't gone through that same degree of rigor, that you know, could be an experimental aircraft that you know, makes headlines because it's a, you know, the air taxi has crashed and caused injury or death, and you know, it may be an aircraft that's you know, hasn't gone through the sort of rigor that these aircraft will go through when they become you know, commercial aircraft.
Excellent. Actually, I just looked at the time. We're down to the last 3 minutes, and being the moderator, I really want to have the last question. So thanks for all your questions, and thanks for.
Jim, would you mind if I add a little bit to that last one?
Yeah, go really quick though.
It'll be very quick. So I think I think at times people who are running vertiports will find that there is no such thing as balance. There's safety and revenue decisions and the consequences of those decisions. And it's important that from the very moment that you recruit your board, that you recruit your investors, it is super clear that safety will always be number one, which may require bringing additional safety support, additional equipment, so on and so forth. Because at the end of the day, we do not want to file an insurance claim. We do not want anything bad to happen. So I think if you start off with that from the very beginning, whether it's investors, board of directors, everyone would understand the decisions that you take.
Brilliant. And as I say to everything and everybody, it's about joining the aviation system at the end of the day. It's a whole huge world out there of safety and how to run a business, etc. So it's really exciting, and it's been really good to have you guys on the panel. So in order to close out, I'm going to ask you in 30 seconds or less, if you could present something next year, so in 365 days from now, what would you want to present? We'll start off with Jorn because he's been quiet, and then we'll go around the room.
Not an easy question. I still take my volocopter hat I had until March this year. So I think, as you know, we plan to fly in Paris commercially and Rome soon thereafter. So I think this is what we want to do. And having routes agreed in cities, vertiports operating commercially, and the flights, I think this would be great to have it within the next 12 months.
Thanks. We'll go to Daniel next.
I would say in a year from now, we would want to present a perfect example of what it is to truly be community integrated, to be able to provide value to our local residents and stakeholders. But more importantly, an example of folks working together, whether it's multiple OEMs and multiple vertiport operators and builders, to showcase a true use case, right? A true example of what it takes to push an industry forward and innovate that. And I think based on where we're at in Chicago, we're currently open. We're in a great location. We're half a mile from all the major highways that lead the suburbs into Chicago. We're currently connecting all medical districts from the Midwest into our medical district. I really hope that God willing, that our teams and our local stakeholders buy into that and continue to push our vision forward.
Ricky?
Yeah, I'd agree with Jörn and Dan, and I think for us to have in a year's time to have a fully functional couple of vertiports at least from Urban Airport in Riyadh or Saudi, that starts to really showcase a fully agnostic solution that shows safety, leadership, but also business viability and the economic benefit to the communities that it's serving. That will be incredible if we could do that, particularly in Saudi, as they're investing a lot and there's a lot of new projects that that could benefit from this technology.
Brilliant. And finally, Clem.
Look, we're focusing pretty much pivoting a little bit this year with some research and development with a university in Australia, and I hope that in a year's time we can present a hardware package and potentially a software package as well that will enable any property owner in an appropriate location to become a vertiport and to create a whole new land use for their properties, and at an affordable price, and at a way where it's becomes a no-brainer that if you've got the space and you've got the capacity on your site, that why wouldn't you have a vertiport there as a service for your customers or your tenants. So that's if I can have another bite at that, the other thing I'd like to see is our planning schemes, land use planning schemes, rewritten to create a new definition called a vertiport, which will be able to be put in commercial and industrial locations where people want to go.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've gone a couple of minutes over, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. And thank you for your different questions, your different thoughts, and especially to our panel, Jörn Jager, Daniel Mahego, Ricky Sandu, and Clem Newton-Brown. It's been absolutely brilliant talking to you guys, and I hope to talk to you more as time goes on. I'm sure I will bump into you a few times in the next 365 days to see how you're getting on with your requests. So on behalf of the sponsor, who would be Saudi Airport Exhibition, thanks for joining us today. If you have any other further questions, I'm sure we are all on LinkedIn and are definitely worth connecting with, and we'll talk to you all again soon. That's goodbye.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
guys.
Bye-bye.